And welcome to Lesson 4 in Unit 2. In this lesson, we are going to be focusing on writing linear equations. So we will be writing linear equations in standard form that we learned in our last lesson. In this lesson, we will be adding slope-intercept and point-slope forms. And we will also be writing equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. In our last lesson, we learned how to graph the parallel and perpendicular lines, but in this lesson, we're actually going to be writing those equations. So the three forms of linear equations that you will be dealing with are standard form, which we learned about last time. And in standard form, A, B, and C are all integers, and their greatest common factor is 1, right? Slope-intercept form is y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. And then we also have a point slope form, y minus y1 equals m parenthesis x minus x1, where x1, y1 is any point and m is the slope. The other x and y are the variables that stay in your equation. So let's jump in and do some examples here. It says write the equation of a line with a slope of -3, and it goes through the point 48, and we want to do it in slope-intercept form. So since they gave me the slope and a point, I'm going to use point-slope form, which is y minus y1, slope x minus x1. So remember the things I'm going to fill in, okay, the things that they've given me x1, y1, and they also gave me the slope. So that's what I'm going to substitute in. The other things are going to stay in my equation. This x and this y stay in there, right? So let's substitute in. Our y variable is 8, so it's y minus 8. Our slope is -3, and our x variable is +4. So just remember it's -4 because that's in the formula. So the next thing we want to do to get it in slope-intercept form was y equals mx plus b. We got to solve it for y. So we need to distribute our 3 and then we'll add 8 to both sides. So y minus 8 is -3x plus 12. So keep track of what you're doing with your signs here. So don't forget. So we have -3 times x, and -3 times -4 gives us a +12. So watch that sign there. So then the next thing we're going to do is to go ahead and add 8 to both sides. And when we add 8 to both sides, we get y is equal to -3x plus 20. Now it's in slope-intercept form. Here's another example. Find the equation of a line going through the point 3, 4 and 0, -3. And again, we want it in slope-intercept form. So the very first thing we need to do is calculate the slope. So remember, the slope is the rise over the run. It's the change in the y variables over the change in the x variables. So this time I'll start with -3 minus 4. So remember, those are the y variables. Let me go ahead and highlight those to make this easier. So let's look at -3 is this one, and 4 is that one. So we go -3 minus 4, and we're going to divide that by 0 right here, minus 3 right there, okay? 0 minus 3 and -3 minus 4. So we're always taking the difference in those. So our slope is +7/3. We end up with -7 over -3, which is +7 over 3. So that's the first piece. Now we know the slope, and we can pick any point we want. So I'll probably use point-slope form here. Y minus y1 is m, x minus x1. So here's our slope. So let me go ahead and highlight our slope. Okay, our slope is 7/3. We know that. And then I just picked a single point. You can choose which point you want to use. The point that I used was the point 3, 4. So I used this point right here. So there's my 3 and there's my 4. And so then what we need to do to get it in slope-intercept form is add 4 to both sides. But first we need to distribute the 7/3 through the parentheses. So let's go ahead and distribute the 7/3. So y minus 4 is 7/3 x minus, now the 3's will cancel here when we distribute that one. Let's just take a look at that. I don't want to lose any of you in the video here. So when we distribute this 7/3, we have 7/3 multiplied by 3 over 1, right? Now those 3's cancel and I just get a 7. So that's where that comes from, and the sign is the same. Now what we need to do is add 4 to both sides, right? So we're going to add 4 here and we're going to add 4 over here. And so our next step, we get y equals 7/3 x minus 3. And that's the equation in slope-intercept form. In this example, it says to find the equation of the line with slope equal to -6 and passing through the point 1/4, -2. This time we want it in standard form. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start out with point slope form. Y minus -2 equals -6 times x minus 1/4, and then distribute your -6 through the parentheses. So this gives me minus a minus is a +2, and we get minus 6x and then plus 6/4. And reducing 6/4, we get 3/2. So our last step is to go ahead and subtract 2 from both sides. And when we do that, let's see where I did my work. We want this in standard form is what we do. So when we put this in standard form, we want the x and y on one side, and then we want the z on the other side. So what we're going to end up doing is multiplying both sides by 2 to get rid of this fraction right here. Remember, we need integers for our coefficient. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 2. So this one gives me 2y plus 4. And on this side, I get -12x. And this 2 cancels here, so I just have a +3. It'd be the same as having 6/2, which is the same as 3. And now we need to add 12x to both sides and subtract 4 from both sides. So I did this all at once, so let me just write down what I did. I went -4 on both sides, and then I added my 12x, right? Plus 12x and plus 12x, right? So that's where all of that went. The 4's canceled. 3 minus 4 is the -1. And so we have 12x plus 2y equals -1. So that is now in standard form. Ax plus by equals c. All right, so the next one down at the bottom says find the equation of the line that's passing through the given points. First of all, we would need to start with the slope. So remember, slope is rise over run, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. When you calculate that, 4 minus a minus 3 is 4 plus 3, which is 7. 1 minus 1 is 0. So we're dividing by 0. So what kind of a slope is that? Well, that is an undefined slope. So it says the x-coordinate of both points is 1. We have a vertical line, and the equation is x equals 1. Now remember, you're going to have to remember what those vertical lines look like. Remember in a previous slide we said it's x equals c. Well, what is the x value? The x value is 1, so that's where this x equals 1 comes from. This has an undefined slope, so we know it goes up and down. Whatever your x-coordinate is what the equation is. Here's another couple of examples here. Determine whether the lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. So we have to solve them both for y. So the first one I have right here, we need to divide by 3. And so we can see the slope of this first line is -4/3. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight that, -4/3. Okay, that's the first line. And then we want to find the equation of, or the slope of the second line. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 3x from both sides and then divide by -4. So we get y equals 3/4 x minus 2. So here's the slope of the second line. So when we compare these two slopes, the first one was -4/3 and the second one was 3/4. Well, those are opposite reciprocals. If we multiply them, we get -1. So that tells us that these lines indeed are what kind of lines? Opposite reciprocal tells us they are perpendicular. All right, a couple more examples here. Write the equation of the line parallel to this line goes through the point in slope-intercept form. So if we want it to be parallel, we need to first of all find what the slope is. So we got to solve this thing for y, subtract 5x from both sides. Now there was a typo in this slide, so I just wrote it in there. It should be a -5x, right? And then divide by 3, and we'll get y equals -5/3 x plus 1/3. So the slope of our line is -5/3. So if we want it to be parallel, the slope is -5/3. And then we're going to use our points. We're going to use point slope form. So y minus 5 equals -5/3 x minus 3. Distribute your -5/3 through the parentheses, and you get -5/3 x. When you multiply times the 3's cancel. We end up with +5. A negative times a negative is a positive. Our last step here, we want this in slope-intercept form, so we have to add 5 to both sides. So we get y equals negative 5/3 x plus 10. Last one on this page here, we have find the equation of the line perpendicular to that equation, passing through the point negative 4, 1. We want slope-intercept form again. And I always like to highlight what form my answer is supposed to be in, just so I know what direction I'm going. So first of all, we need to find the slope, right? We want to find the slope means solve for y. If I'm going to solve for y, I'm going to move the x term and the constant to the other side. That's a little shortcut for you. Sometimes instead of doing the opposite, think about if you move across the equal sign, it changes the sign. So if I were to drag this thing and drop it over there, the only thing that changes is the sign, right? So then I need to divide by negative 3, and we have y equals 5/3 x plus 4/3, because both signs will change when we divide by our negative. So that tells me the slope right there is 5/3. So we want it to be perpendicular, right? So if we want a perpendicular slope, okay, perpendicular slope, and we want it to be perpendicular to that, right? So if it's perpendicular, that tells me that our slope is negative 3/5. And here's our point. So let's use point slope form. Y minus 1 is equal to negative 3/5. That's a perpendicular slope, right? When we look at that. And then x minus a minus 4. Well, you're right. This is going to be an x plus 4. So we have y minus 1 is negative 3/5 x. And they're distributing this right away. Negative times a negative is a positive, and then it's 12/5. 3 times 4 is 12, and we still have it over 5. Add 1 to both sides. We have negative 3/5 x minus 12/5, and then this one we add 1. That's the same as adding 5/5. So what's happening right there, let me get a pen here. This plus 1, when we bring it over to the other side, instead of writing it as a plus 1, we're writing it as 5/5 so that we can add these two fractions. Okay, so adding 5/5 to negative 12/5 gives us y equals negative 3/5 x minus 7/5. All right, here's your lesson check for you. 4 problems for you to try on your own. Work on those and bring your answers to class. See you next time.